Welcome to the lecture 28 of week 10 of this course Climate Change and Extreme Events. In the previous lecture, we have talked about various types of socio-economic impacts posed by climate extreme events. Then we have also discussed about health impact, we have also discussed about social impact, psychological impact. Then towards the end of the third lecture, we have also talked about multiple hazards or impacts which are created by climate extremes on particularly developing countries, which are low income countries, and how do we take several examples where the community engagement were performed to basically mitigate the effect of climate extremes. That can be a kind of a case study we have already discussed, and those results can be replicated to some other areas as well to mitigate the impact of climate extremes, in particularly in the lower income economies or lower middle income economies like that. In this particular week, we will primarily focus on the policies. In this lecture, we will talk about international agreements and national policies on the climate change. If you are aware about the Paris Agreement, which has happened in 2015, which is intent to basically set up a threshold of temperature extremes, so that we cannot cross that particular extremes, and the negative effect of those thresholds should be minimized as much as possible. So, based on that particular agreements, we have already classified multiple countries based on their severity level. There are some countries which are already developed, there are some countries which are in the developing phase, there are some countries which are very lagging behind, or very low income countries which are a long way to achieve that developed nation tag like that. So, for these kind of discrepancies we have across the world based on the socio-economic conditions. So, it is a kind of a world agreement on unified framework, so that we can apply in different parts of the world dependent upon their socio-economic conditions to achieve the goal of 1.5 degree the favorable conditions where we have to, or 2 degree or like that. So, basically to achieve that goal. So, based on this particular agreement, there are several countries which are almost sufficient, there are insufficient in terms of targeting that goal of achieving 1.5 or lesser than that temperature in 21st scenarios. Then we have also talked about multiple other countries which are highly insufficient and critically insufficient. So, there are large gaps which are there, and therefore, primarily in this lecture we will talk about how do we strengthen those gaps by bottom up approach, or primarily focusing on the national policies framework, and then using the framework which are provided by World Organization, which could be Paris Agreement or Kyoto Protocol or UNFCCC like that. So, this is all we will discuss about in this particular lecture. So, the overall objectives of this particular lecture is we will understand key international climate agreements. Then we will explore some national policies, particularly Indian region, for climate and mitigation and adaptation plan. We will also analyze the effectiveness and challenges of climate policies, and we will discuss some two case studies of where successful climate governance and adaptation policies or agreements which has been implemented, and what was the results they have achieved because of implementing all these different types of climate change agreements like that. So, the first question comes to our mind is, what is the need for climate agreements and policies? So, if we talk about, let us say, global agreements, yes, there is a very significant need, because it is very important for transboundary issues. Climate change affects all nations, whether it is cross border cooperations is required. Therefore, some sort of a unified approach or global bodies are required to solve these transboundaries, cross countries, neighboring countries issues, or some sort of coordinated efforts which basically provides a framework for collaborative actions which can be enhanced mitigations and adaptation strategies for different regions which are particularly located in one zone or multiple other clusters or classified into different socioeconomic clusters as well. This global agreements also plays a very significant role on local action plans. Why? Because global agreements gives a framework where we have to set up 1.5 degree, we have to make sure that there should be a carbon neutral economy, or we have to improve the early warning systems, something like that. So these are the part of the framework. They propagate these thought to the national policy makers, and based on their the extreme levels or type of climate extremes, they curate that framework in their policies and implement their different regions. For example, the national policies, national level climate initiatives, and then after that, once the national policies has been set up, there is a need for local adaptation and local actions. So it is possible that, for example, if you take an example of Indian region, there are some regions which are highly susceptible to or prone to frequent flooding disaster. There are few regions which are drought prone. There are few regions where we have increased frequency of heat waves. There are few regions where we have landslides, flash floods, etc., or cyclones. So we have to have a local action plan depending upon different types of climatic extremes, so that we can mitigate or we can adopt very sustainable plans, so that we can mitigate the effect of those negative impact of those climatic extremes like that. What is the role of national policies? Because as we have just discussed that global bodies, whether it could be UNFCCC, UN body or Paris Agreement, or like all these agreements, it provides some sort of framework that basically curate towards a particular national policies and they implement in the local scale. What is the role of national policies? It is a very significant role. For example, it will help us carbon pricing, which means implementing the financial mechanism to reduce carbon emission, carbon trading, for example, renewable energy. What is carbon trading? Trading is basically carbon. Let's say there are two companies. One is emitting a lot of carbon dioxide because of some industrial activity, but other another industry is not emitting that much amount of. So suppose government has implemented X amount of carbon credit to all the industries, right? So it is possible that industry A will emit a lot of carbon CO2 gas emission, and that will surpass that threshold. So that would be a negative, it will be a deficit conditions. Or there is another company where we have a surplus state of carbon share or trades or like that. So what will happen, this the company B can trade their carbon credit to company A, and that credit has been transferred to the company A so that they can increase their productions as per their need. And since there is no extra need of carbon credits in that particular industrial B, they will rely upon the current state of their productions level like that. So this is how basically this carbon trading works. So it is basically a kind of carbon pricing the nation can decide, and that basically implement the financial mechanism to reduce the carbon emission, because it restrict not to use excess amount of CO2 given the permissible limit. If they are crossing it, they have to buy some sort of carbon credits from some other industries where they have surplus values like that. So it is kind of a balancing approach. It is providing financial restrictions for not to emit a lot of CO2 gas in terms of increasing productions and all. Renewable energy incentives, which is also very important. For example, if you provide subsidies to solar panel, that is one example. Similarly, providing subsidies to wind energy to the farmers. So, that is a kind of a renewable energy incentives, so that we can promote the renewable energy in those areas and can further reduce the carbon footprints. Energy efficiency standards, we have to also benchmark standards. All the appliances, whatever we are buying, AC, fridge, whatever. So, there has to be some sort of marking. What is the 5-star, 4-star, 3-star rating, like that. So, that is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency directly related to what is the amount of energy it is needed, and that is basically CO2 emissions, or because if you are using extra energy, that is somehow we are directly relating with if it is coal based or some sort of energy supplying, then we are directly relating to the CO2 emissions, like that. Climate resilience planning, which is also very important, because national policies also gives an framework for planning a better strategies for climate resilience. So, there are major international climate agreements has been occurred that provides some sort of frameworks to different countries across the world. There is a UNFCCC established global climate framework, which is in 1992. Then in 1997 there is a Kyoto Protocol, which sets the binding targets. In 2015 there is a Paris Agreement, which commits a limiting of the warming 1.5, 2 degree, 4 degree, like that. In the UNFCCC there is a global cooperations establishment of years where it is started, and then there is a key objectives to mitigate the negative impact of climate change and reduce mitigate or adopt such sustainable strategies to mitigate the effect of negative consequences of these climate extreme events, like that. So, that is there they have started with. During the Kyoto Protocol, they have developed new nations target focus on the specific emission reduction, which is target sets and developed for different countries. They have started looking at the market based mechanism, introduced the mechanism for carbon trading, as we just discussed, and then they differentiate between countries. Suppose there are countries which are already developed, and there are countries which needs to be developed in several years ahead, developing nations. So, it is not correct options to restrict all the countries or take or consider all the countries in a similar picture, because it is possible that some has been already advanced, some are actually on the way of advancement, like that. So, therefore, we have to have some sort of differentiation between countries. In the Paris Agreement 2015, this agreement has talked about primarily the global warming commitment, where they have started talking about some threshold, where the temperature cannot be greater than, let us say, increment of the temperature cannot be greater than 2 degrees centigrade, or the ambition to achieve a goal is 1.5 degrees centigrade. That was the global warming commitment. Adaptation and resilience, that is basically some sort of strategies for building resilience on climate impacts, and some sort of NDC framework, which is basically encourage countries to set up voluntary climate action plans for every financial years, like that. So, in the Paris Agreement, they have talked about some sort of mitigation strategies, set up the temperature goal, for example, then countries emission of reduction plan, 5-year updation of regular revision of that, whatever implementation they are doing, that is the regular plan of revisions, and voluntary contribution for non-binding countries commitments, like that. Then there is a financial structure they have established, for example, climate finance, developed nations, developing countries, and some sort of a budget which is basically targeted for annual funding amount. There are some adaptation strategies, which is basically strengthening the resilience, infrastructure enhancement, disaster resilience, and risk preparation. And there is a transparency framework. For example, there is a establishment of transparency framework, which basically countries reports on emissions report on mitigation actions, report on adaptation actions, report on support provided received, and what is the global community access reports, like that. It is kind of mix of all these things which they have discussed about. Then there is a national climate policies which is also implemented, where we talk about carbon pricing, carbon taxes, and cap of the carbon trading system. Then we also talked about renewable energy mandates, where what kind of the renewable energy which is required and what kind of the incentives a government can provide. Then they have also talked about deforestation and land use regulation issues, so that we can increase the carbon sink and provide some sort of carbon neutral economies around the world, like that. So, sustainable land use practices, biodiversity conservations, these are the some of the goals to implement. There is a country specific approaches. If you talk about multiple countries, there are difference in their socio-economic conditions. If you talk about European Union European Union countries, there is a Green Deal, where they are talking about emission reduction, they are talking about green technology investment, and they are talking about some of the stricter regulations of implementation of different climate policies in their region, so that they can reduce or become a carbon neutral economies, like that. There is a India's National Action Plan on Climate Change. We are talking about solar energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable agriculture. There is a United States Inflation Reduction Act, which is basically talking about clean energy, electric vehicle, and industrial decarbonizations, like that. So, these are some of the country specific approaches they are applying to mitigate the effect of carbon dioxide or those carbon emission, and then further to in line with the overall global nations surveys, or basically their the pointers they have discussed, like that. There is a case study of European Union Green Deal, where we talk about climate neutrality by 2050. They are talking about energy, renewable energy of sources, different sources. They are talking about transport reduce of emission in transportation systems. They are talking about agricultural sustainable practices in agriculture and industrial emission reductions, like that. There is a so they are talking about primarily the expansion of renewable energy, as well as the phasing out the fossil fuel subsidies. So, energies though renewable energies are basically some sort of directive they are providing, then there is some investment in infrastructure they are also providing. So, 40% of renewable energy by 2030, that is their goal, and during that this particular fossil fuel subsidy, they are talking about carbon pricing mechanism, and then limiting the EU emission, or implementing the EU emission trading systems, like that. When they are talking about, there are some challenges also. For example, fossil fuel industry job losses, that is one of the key issues when we are talking or shifting from one energy sector to another energy sectors, like that, or just transition initiatives, because it creates some sort of balance economic impact with the higher sustainable goals. Then there is a economic dislocation in high carbon regions, and there is a policy design for competitive. So, these are some of the challenges, and this is basically the timeline they have adopted for implementing climate neutrality or climate neutral economies by 2050s, like that. So, there is another case study of India's National Action Plan on Climate Change. We are talking about National Solar Mission, we are talking about National Mission on Enhanced Energy Efficiency, we are talking about National Mission on Sustainable Habitat, Water Mission, Green India, Himalayan Ecosystem, or National Mission on Strategic Knowledge of Climate Change, and National Mission on Sustainable Agricultures, like that. So, under this NAPCC mission, we are talking about essentially the solar mission, the water mission, the energy efficiency mission, and there is a afforestation mission basically. and that is basically some sort of parameters which define whether it is a success or a kind of a a challenges. For example, what is the investment and job creation if you are implementing all these, what is the global leadership positions of India's, and what is the renewable energy growth status. So, this is basically defines if you implementing all these schemes, these ingredients are needed. What are the challenges? Financial constraints, because if we are implementing certain national missions or national, we need some sort of financial support so that we can provide that fund to the local level so that they can adopt the policy. For example, if we are implementing some sort of subsidy plan for solar power, we have to provide some sort of funds to back up that particular policies. Infrastructure deficits, we have to create certain amount of infrastructures across India that will be favorable to the renewable energy growth, and the rural implementation of several types of hurdles. For example, how we can reach to these implementation policies to the very basic level, rural level, village level, like that. So, that is some of the challenges of implementation of these NAPCC across Indian. So, whenever we are talking about any kind of policy, whether it could be global or national or local, it is supported by some sort of financial mechanism. So, for example, when we are talking about who are the climate finance distribution system, so there is a source of finance which is could be developed countries, private sectors, international institutions, like that. There is some sort of financial mechanism which are funds are channeled through mechanism like GCF and adaptation funds. Then we are talking about project funding, national governments, local communities and private sectors as well. Then there is a challenges and delays, which also we have to take into account, because there is a bureaucracy, delays, and there is a transparency issues can be also be created when we are talking about some sort of financial system in some regions, like that. There is a climate financing mechanism that also works. For example, there is a developing countries broadly which is focusing on mitigation and adaptation steps and mobilizes the diverse fundings, like that. There is a adaptation fund which is basically talking about the vulnerable nations specifically. They are talking about the adaptation focused projects, they are talking about carbon market contributions. So, these are the some of the carbon, this climate finance mechanism are primarily focusing on. If you are talking about GCF, green climate fund, or if you are talking about adaptation fund, there are several types of different types of objectives, set of rules they follow. Challenges in climate financial distributions are accountability and transparency, that is one. Slow approval process that takes a time, ensuring the equity and fund allocations, and how high administrative costs. Some of these challenges where the financial mechanism can be impacted. What are the challenges in implementing of these climate policies? There are strong public opposition in carbon taxing, because whenever you implement certain new things, there is a kind of a resistance we face from the public, and therefore, that is also in the case of carbon taxes as well, that we have to tackle. Fossil fuel industry lobbying, that is one another issue. There is a minor regulatory adjustment, which is basically minimal resistance and low influence regions, like that. There is a efficiency of policy of communication, that is also very equally important, because how we communicate that policies to the communities or the people, despite when we have the high resistance, to reduce those resistance, like that. There is a economic constraints as well. For example, when we are talking about industrialized national facing transition cost, when you are talking about emerging economics investment in renewable energies, renewable sectors, there are developed nations which are transitioning to the green technologies, or developing nation with the limited resources as well. So, these are some of the economical constraints we also face when we are implementing some sort of climate policies in several different parts of the different socio-economic countries as well. What are the enforcement and complication issues? Lack of transparency and data set, whatever they are producing. Monitoring and remote areas, that is also one of the key challenges when we are talking about implementing a policy. We have to also have a very good monitoring report very frequently. So, that might take a problem, because if we have a remote areas, distant areas, not very connected areas, that might create some sort of problems as well. There is an enforcement mechanism. What kind of the issues with ensuring compliance and enforcing penalties on the emission regulation, that is also equally important, and that can be also kind of a issue when we are implementing in certain regions like that. So, what is the future in climate governance? How do we make this system more efficient so that we can achieve the goal which we have already set up by 1.5 degree in near future, or become a carbon neutral economies across the world, most of the countries. So, what are the future directions? So, strengthening the commitments, those central NDC commitments, global climate efforts, regular monitoring, regular updates is one of the important steps. Focus on equity, justice principle or equity or like that, and then increase accountability and transparency. That basically also very important when we are enhancing the policy ambition in certain area. There is a technological innovations, carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, green hydrogen, hydrogen production, infrastructure, or cost reduction of multiple renewable energy sources as well. That is kind of a technological invention we can do to move towards the renewable energy sources more efficiently. Then strengthening the global cooperations through the climate finance, technology transfer, or regional cooperations. That is the three key issues where we can do some sort of global cooperations, and that is basically can help us to further improve the implementation of this climate governance in different parts of the world as well. And there is a future climate governance roadmap. There is a current climate governance landscape, enhance the policy ambition through different parameters like that. There is a technological innovations, strengthening the global cooperations, and then we have a sustainable low carbon future or carbon neutral economies by the end of 2050 or 2100 like that. So, this is kind of a future climate governance roadmap. If we follow, we probably reduce the carbon emission, and therefore, once the carbon emission will be reduced, it is likely to be the greenhouse gases associated climate extreme events will also be reduced, and then we have a more safer or more world in the future conditions like that. So, in this particular lecture, we have primarily talked about different types of international agreements, why it is important, what these agreements frameworks, what the information they provides, and what is these international agreements are important in terms of national policy building or their driving of the implementation of those policies in different parts of the world as well. What is the effective climate policies which are require financial support, and what could be the enforcement mechanism? What is the channel of financial support? How we can implement those effective climate policies in different parts of the world, whether it could be carbon trading, carbon neutral, or some sort of moving towards renewable energies or providing subsidies like that. And what would be so these all these frameworks has some sort of challenges implementation of different parts of the world. Therefore, learn from that challenges and how we can improve those different points so that we can have future climate actions depends on some sort of global cooperations and innovations, technological transfer, regional cooperations. All of this we can further enhance the climate action plan in the future conditions as well. So, this is overall the discussion on this particular topic. In the next lecture, we will talk about primarily the risk reduction strategies and community resilience in the lecture 29. Thank you so much for your attention.